Digging in the Dirt with Dr. David Lipovich.
Episode 2, In the Beginning. So if we want to understand our own history, we need to understand what happened in the ancient Near East. If we want to understand the ancient Near East, we need to understand where we, as a species, come from. So where do we begin? I guess at the beginning. Our earliest ancestors, at least those who most of us would recognize at least as looking something like us, first appear in East Africa around 4.2 million years ago. These early human ancestors, or hominins, were called Australopithecines. Various species of Australopithecus existed, spreading throughout Africa, and eventually becoming extinct about 2 million years ago. Our genus, Homo, descends from the Australopithecines. So, if we want to understand our own history, we need to understand what happened in the ancient Near East. If we want to understand the ancient Near East, we need to understand where we, as a species, come from. So, where do we begin? I guess at the beginning. Our earliest ancestors, at least those who most of us would recognize at least as looking something like us, first appear in East Africa around 4.2 million years ago. These early human ancestors, or hominins, were called Australopithecines. Various species of Australopithecus existed, spreading throughout Africa and eventually becoming extinct about 2 million years ago. Our genus, Homo, descends from the Australopithecines. Quite probably the best known Australopithecine is Lucy. Lucy was identified by Donald Johanson in 1974 in Hadar, Ethiopia. He named her after the figure from the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Her 40% complete skeleton, that you can see there in the middle, was a rarity given that most hominin finds are just a handful of tooth and bone fragments. A nearly 90% complete Australopithecus skeleton was found in 1994 in Gauteng, South Africa, that was nicknamed Littlefoot, adding to our limited understanding about what our Australopithecine ancestors looked like. That's Littlefoot's skull on the right. The brains of most species of Australopithecus were roughly 35% of the size of a modern human brain, but more than the average volume of a chimpanzee brain. Australopithecus stood 1.2 to 1.4 meters tall. Males were up to 50% larger than females. Their bodies were proportioned more like those of bonobos and chimpanzees than modern humans, and they were fully hair-covered. Those are bonobos or pygmy chimpanzees on the right. Australopithecus was like us, bipedal. They walked upright. Bipedalism left the hands free to grasp objects like food or their own young, and allowed them to look over tall grasses for possible food sources, or possibly more importantly, predators. Australopithecus's hand was probably incapable of producing stone tools, but included a grasping thumb somewhat like our own. Australopithecus species are thought to have eaten mainly fruit, vegetables, and tubers, and perhaps easy-to-catch animals such as small lizards. The earliest documented representative of our genus, Homo, is Homo habilis, which evolved around 2.8 million years ago. Homo habilis, or handyman, is the first species for which there is clear evidence for the use of stone tools. These very simple tools are called by archaeologists the Oldowan stone tool industry, named after the site they were first found at in the Olduvai Gorge. These tools were mainly used for butchering, and so they are thought to have consumed high quantities of meat, which they almost certainly scavenged rather than hunted. These early tools were made by chipping one or a few flakes off a stone pebble using another stone. The basic tool was identified by Mary Leakey as a chopper. This picture you see here is a typical chopper, but the production of these tools also resulted in a number of large and very sharp flakes. It is actually unclear whether the chopper was the tool or the core the flakes were not from, or if both the flakes and choppers were being used as tools. Either way, these would have been very simple tools. That having been said, it takes a more complicated brain and a well-developed grasping hand with an opposable thumb in order to make such tools. While they seem very basic to us, This technology was used for over 1 million years by our distant ancestors. Sometime during the heyday of Homo habilis, a random genetic mutation occurred which saw the rapid growth and size of the brains of these early hominins. While there is no direct correlation between brain size and intelligence, generally speaking, it takes a bigger, more complicated brain to do more complicated things. Over time, these bigger-brained Homo habilis would evolve into a form closer to our own. By around 2 million years ago, Homo habilis had evolved into a new species, Homo erectus, or upright man. Homo erectus had a more modern gait and body proportions, and was the first human species to have exhibited a flat face, prominent nose, and probably sparse body hair coverage. Homo erectus was an apex predator who hunted animals as big as elephants. Hunting and butchering larger animals like this straight-tusked elephant required an improvement in technology, and Homo erectus had the mental capacity to do that. Homo erectus is associated with the new Acheulean stone tool industry, named after the site it was first found at in France, and is postulated to have been the earliest human ancestor capable of using fire, hunting and gathering in coordinated groups, making clothes, caring for injured or sick group members, possibly seafaring, and even of producing art. The new Acheulean-style tool showed a dramatic increase in complexity over Oldowan tools. The primary innovation is that the stone was worked symmetrically and on both sides. This made it possible to create hand axes, like the one you see here, as well as smaller tools made from large flakes that had been struck from stone cores. Such tools required more planning ability, requiring the toolmaker to think 1 or 2 steps ahead. This would suggest a significant increase in the mental capacity of Homo erectus. In order to manufacture one of these hand axes, a hard hammer stone would first be used to rough out the shape of the tool by knocking off or knapping large flakes. The flint knapper would work around the remaining stone core, removing flakes alternately from each face. Then, thinning flakes were removed using a bone or antler hammer. Finally, after some detailing of the shape, some Acheulean tools had a single large flake removed parallel to the edge of the hand axe to create an extra sharp cutting edge. Analysis of the wear on Acheulean tools suggests that they were multi-use implements for chopping wood, butchering animals, and scraping hides when necessary. Homo erectus males and females may have been roughly the same size as each other, sort of like modern humans. Size nonetheless ranged widely from 146 to 185 centimeters height and 40 to 68 kilograms in weight. It is unclear if Homo erectus was capable of speech, though it is postulated they communicated using some sort of proto-language. Homo erectus was the first of our hominin ancestors to leave Africa and spread to Asia and Europe, ranging as far as the Iberian Peninsula in the west and Java in the east. Migration into the frigid climate of Ice Age Europe may have only been possible because of the invention of controlled fire by Homo erectus. They also had developed clothing that was needed now that our ancestors were no longer as hairy as chimps. The combination of improved technologies and bigger brains made it possible for the first time for our ancestors to think about leaving our African cradle and exploring out into the rest of the world. The famous Peking man, discovered in the 1920s by Canadian paleoanthropologist Davidson Black, was one of those early world travelers. To get to China, though, these ancestors of ours headed up the Great Rift Valley. That brought hominins for the first time to the region of the Mediterranean Basin and the ancient Near East. In our next session, entitled New World Man, we will look at the first evidence for the presence of our very distant ancestors in the Near East.
If you are enjoying digging in the dirt and would like to help us continue to produce more episodes, please spread the word about our series and send us a small gratuity to show your support using the following link, tinyurl.com/3rxdkvt4.